From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Justice Clarence Thomas will amend a financial disclosure after a news report on a 2014 sale of his mother's house to a longtime friend, as Senator Dick Durbin asks Chief Justice John Roberts to testify on Supreme Court ethics. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial page writer Barton Swaim. The investigative news outlet ProPublica has published another story this week on Justice Thomas's longtime friendship with Texas billionaire Harlan Crow. I recall the first story said that Thomas had spent time on Crow's yacht and at his ranch at his private resort in upstate New York. And the new story says that Crow's company bought some properties from three co-owners, including Thomas, his mother, and the family of Thomas's late brother, for a price of $133,000 in 2014, which put Crow in the position of owning the house where Justice Thomas's mother was living. Here is the statement from Harlan Crow. My intention is to one day create a public museum at the Thomas home dedicated to telling the story of our nation's second black Supreme Court justice, who was born in Pinpoint, Georgia, and later raised in Savannah. I approached the Thomas family about my desire to maintain this historic site so future generations could learn about the inspiring life of one of our greatest Americans who was born into abject poverty and segregation and moved to this home to live with his grandparents when he was 7, unquote. Kim, what do you make of this second round of the Justice Thomas narrative?
Yeah, it's no more credible than the first round. And I would point our listeners, if they want to just read some amazing real journalism on this, our colleague James Toronto has been dissecting these stories, making very clear fundamentally this point, that was there apparently an inadvertent error by the justice to report some things that should have been reported? Yes. Has the justice said that he is going to correct those disclosure forms? Yes. Is this a big deal? No, because this happens frequently with justices. And also, I think James has made the very good point that one of the issues here is that there's a statute that governs some of this. There are some separate rules. And then there's this very complicated guidebook that gets put out trying to explain all these rules to the justices as to how they're supposed to report this stuff. And it's very, very, very unclear. And we've seen this also because of that lack of clarity. Other justices have also had to refile some of their disclosure forms because they and even messes of other lawyers have been unable to understand completely exactly what they're supposed to be reporting and not. So the bottom line in here was that, is this being blown into something much bigger than it should be? Absolutely. This is a very small amount of money that we're talking about, and basically what appears to be a technical error with regards to what should have been reported.
Barton, you went and visited Harlan Crow in Dallas for an interview that is in the Weekend Wall Street Journal, already up online. The headline, if listeners want to go find it, is Harlan Crow is collateral damage of a smear campaign against Clarence Thomas. And I'm wondering if you can give listeners a sense of what Harlan Crow is like and what he told you.
Yeah, I had heard of Harlan Crow before this ProPublica report. He's not a newsy personality, I would say, but he's known as a philanthropist and a backer of broadly conservative causes. But I didn't know a lot about him. I saw a number of left progressive commentators claiming on Twitter and elsewhere that he was a collector of Nazi memorabilia, some of them claiming that he is an actual Nazi sympathizer. My BS detector was activated. Anytime you hear the word Nazi thrown around, you know someone doesn't have a real argument to make. So, yes, I went out to Dallas and visited his home, and also he has a kind of an office park and a research center in downtown Dallas called Old Parkland. But what I learned was that he is a prodigious, world-class collector of artifacts, paintings, sculptures, books, manuscripts, most of them having to do with American history or things related to events or wars in U.S. history. So one of his interests is paintings by political leaders. On the walls of his house, he has paintings by Churchill, one by Eisenhower, another by JFK, which I didn't know JFK even painted, and a couple by George W. Bush. Not on his walls, but stored for historical interest are two watercolors by Adolf Hitler. So he had purchased these and has stored them he has a lot of manuscripts and other things related to World War II for purposes of historical research. And he allows members of the public or scholars to come research his enormous library. So yeah, this is the thing that permits some people who bear a deep hatred for Clarence Thomas to say that the justice has a, quote, Nazi benefactor. It's a complete lie, but this is the environment that we now live in. Readers may have also heard something about his so-called Garden of Evil. It's a real thing. So after the Soviet Union collapsed in 89, 90, 91, there were statues of communist revolutionaries all over Europe and Asia that had to be quietly taken down and removed, or in some cases violently taken down. And in the years after that happened, Mr. Crow started buying them and having them legally, he pointed out to me, shipped to the U.S. So in a sort of large garden area adjacent to his house, he has statues of Ho Chi Minh, Mao, several of Lenin, Tito, a number of others. It's weird. And he even told me, he kind of admitted that it's weird. But I have to say, a stroll through that garden really does lend itself to a conversation about how the great crimes of the 20th century were allowed to happen. So that's a little taste of Harlan Crow.
The other thing that stuck out to me from your interview with him is he may be a conservative, a Republican donor, but he says that the speakers that he has hosted for debates at his research campus have included Beto O'Rourke and Hakeem Jeffries, President Clinton, and he talks about the importance of debate and being able to have in a democratic country a civil discourse, which he seems to be a little bit concerned that the United States is losing. Kim, the other piece of this story that I find a little bit perplexing is we're not even talking about a huge amount of money here. So I get the point that if this was supposed to be disclosed, and everybody seems to agree that in this case that is true. There's a CNN story saying that Clarence Thomas intends to amend that 2014 disclosure to reflect that real estate deal. This is in contrast to some of the other things that have been raised, these trips or private jet flights that Justice Thomas apparently took on Crow's jet. Those, Justice Thomas has said, his reading of the previous disclosure rules was that that did not have to be disclosed. Now those disclosure rules have been updated, and he's saying he will do so from here on out. But Kim, with the real estate deal, I mean, again, just to repeat the number, the ProPublica story says we're talking about $133,000 from 3 co-owners, one of whom is Justice Thomas. I mean, is that an amount of money that is going to be corrupting to a Supreme Court justice? What is the real allegation here?
Right. And I think you have to add to this too, Kyle, and this to me is the biggest point about this, is what exactly is being corrupted? Meaning, does Harlan Crow have business in front of the Supreme Court? No. As he has said, as people around Thomas have said, as anyone who can go look at the record has made clear, he does not have business in front of the court. So what exactly is the purpose of supposedly trying to buy off Clarence Thomas? No one who has done any of these stories has been able to point to any connection. They haven't even attempted to. And then, yes, then you get into the question about numbers. Okay, this is not a kind of make or break amount of money here. As you said, he was a co-owner, a number of other people. This was a very small amount of money. And again, when you add in the reality that some of these forms are incredibly complicated. Again, we've had plenty of other justices that have had to refile their disclosure forms because of errors of omission, or because they inadvertently forgot something, or because they simply were confused as to what they had to report and not report. Then you realize what a storm in a tea kettle this is. There's really not a lot there. And that gets back to, why are we having this discussion? We're having this discussion for one reason. There are a number of opinion writers who masquerade as journalists, who are left-leaning, who want to join with Democrats and progressives in their aim of smearing Justice Thomas with the goal of either getting him to recuse himself in cases or getting him to resign, and with the broader goal of besmirching and tarring the entire Supreme Court, so that one day, if they obtain their ambitions of being able to get rid of the filibuster in the Senate, then they will have the argument that they need to make that they are justified in, for instance, packing the Supreme Court or making other changes that will somehow wrench the court back into their hands because they're still frustrated that there's a conservative majority.